and then a park.
Sorry about that.
You're good. And then a parking lane on each side. And that's all within the existing footprint of the roadway that you have right now. And then I will add that we have some bump outs at intersections, which you'll see more detail in the next sheets that we show. But this is just, looking at it as if you're on the street with the cars there. So that's our first option. And then the other option is looking at adding cyclists into the mix here. Now, unfortunately, just based on the existing roadway width, you can't have, kind of the best of all of the worlds just fitting in that area. We can't have the through lanes for our vehicles and the bicycles and parking on both sides. So this is kind of a compromise between those ideas, having a bike lane and a through lane in each direction. And then parking would just be on the one side of the road. And so then going back to the plan view here, same idea, just, a different view of it, looking at just this typical section around the Bryden Road area, where we have parking on the one side and the other side. And these are the bump outs that I was suggesting there. And that's basically at pretty much all of the intersections. And you can see that that adds a little bit more depth there for our pedestrians crossing. That way you can get out in front of the vehicles that are parked. And you have a nice little median there for refuge before you make your way to the other side. And you'll see the medians. This is what I meant earlier when I said that the medians, you can't go the whole width of the road, or the whole length, I guess, just because then we would be blocking driveways, you'd be blocking, some of these side streets. So we really just have the medians in areas where we think it's possible to have them, where they won't be blocking any movements. So this is our first option here, parking on both sides, through lanes on both sides within the existing roadway. So then our other option that I mentioned has bike lanes. So we have our bike lane on this side with the through lane, and then same thing in the opposite direction, your through lane, your bike lane, and then the parking is on the west side. So I guess I forgot to mention that in the beginning. If you didn't catch that, north is to the right in these pictures. So the parking would be just on the west side, and same thing as before, you have the bump outs on that side where we have parking, but it's not as big of a deal because you won't have the on-street parking that's blocking the visibility of those pedestrians, since it's just going to be a bike lane on this side. So I'll pass it back to you, Ben, if you wanted to add any more to that.
I think one just having heard some kind of preliminary feedback on this, a couple things to draw out. First off, you guys drew it so that there was, if it were a cycle lane, that there would be parking on one side, on the west side in this instance. That could be parking on the east side. It's interchangeable based upon what would work best. We're not expecting the idea of losing parking on one side of the street to be popular with people who live on the street. So we really want to hear your feedback. And the other is you guys also drew up a cycle track option, which was one that showed really similar concept, but that's just that the bike lanes would be going both ways together on one side of the street. So it would kind of sequester the bike lanes together. They're all interchangeable concepts. The big shift is the idea of bump outs in the first place. The idea of those, protect those more protected crosswalks, and whether or not introducing a cycling component to this would be important. And I do want to say, I didn't really set the stage properly, that there was a bike plan that was created last year and adopted by City Council called Bicycle Friendly Bexley. It did suggest that we should be examining the idea of bike lanes on Drexel being specifically a connector street between Main and Broad Street that gets used a lot by cyclists, and would provide a really excellent interface to the community, both to Main Street and then north to the park systems and other places in North Bexley. So there's some logic to that. And there's a there's a plan, but potentially behind it. But again, feedback is really important. So I don't want to add a whole lot more, and unless Andy or Dave, you have something to add.
I don't have anything to add, Ben.
All right. So I think maybe what I'd love to do is just add everybody here as a panelist. It's going to take me a little bit of time here to do it. So bear with me. But what that means from your perspective is you guys will show up in the video view and the audio. You'll have full access to that. The thing I would ask is that people take turns talking. I'm trying to see if there's a raise hand feature for panelists. Maybe we should just use raise hand on attendees. I'm sorry, guys. We normally do meetings like this, not as a webinar. So if people have feedback, go ahead and use the raise hand feature. You should see a raise hand button, and then I'll move you over as a panelist. How about that? It's probably the best way to do it. So any questions, comments, thoughts? All right, Suzanne Whistler, you're up first, and I'm going to move you over. And you guys, we'll just move people over as the hands are raised, okay? So Suzanne, you should be able to talk.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. All right. Thanks for doing this. Those are great designs. The one question I have for both of those is, which one is best for slowing down traffic on the street? I think that's a big issue for the residents on our street is people who zoom down the road, me included sometimes, but we'd like to be able to slow it down to at least, the speed limit, if not a little bit lower. And so I'm wondering which of those options would be best for that?
Yeah, so I would say that both options will calm traffic compared to the existing conditions, right? They're both going to be an improvement compared to what you have now. But if you're comparing the two options to each other, I would say the first option with the parking on both sides and the bump outs on both sides and the median in areas where we can have it, that will probably give us the most traffic calming. And that is with the caveat that you don't have enough space for dedicated bike lanes on that option, so that's why it's kind of a trade-off there. I do think that the bike lane option will still have traffic calming because you still have that the bump outs on the one side where you have the on-street parking, but you don't have that benefit of having space for a median in areas. All of that width goes to the bike lanes. But like I said, I think we'll still get traffic calming in both options.
Okay. And then in the part of town on Drexel where I live, it's closer to Broad Street. We get a lot of CSG parking on both sides of that street, and seems like it'll push the parking much further south with both of these options. So it pretty much goes down to Elm.
Right, and that was honestly the reason, when we were deciding with that option, do you want parking on the west side or parking on the east side? That was why we chose parking on the west side, was because of CSG up there on the north end of the site. And yeah, I do agree. I think it'll change things a little bit there as far as parking, since you're losing parking on the one side. But overall, I think they should have enough space to have the operations that they need there.
Yeah.
You want to add to that, Ben?
I just would add that, so I was speaking briefly to our tree commission before this meeting, and they took a look at it, and an excellent point was raised, which was that CSG, and I know CSG is on the call, so I'm sure we'll hear from them in a second, but they have bus parking dedicated on the west side, which is one of the reasons we thought that it would make sense to have that be the parking side. But the point was that's not often used. And when it's not bus parking, it's no parking. And so the question was, because there's not parking there typically, could that be the bike lane side? And then from time to time, it would just be a situation of buses would be able to park in that area. So that's a question to consider. And I just wanted to raise that. I also want to apologize. I realize my name is City of Bexley. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ben Kessler. I'm the mayor. And I know a lot of these names here, but I didn't want to assume, so I apologize. Suzanne, thank you so much. If it's okay
Thanks.
with you, I'll just keep you on, and then like, I think that will work. There's no hand raise feature as a panelist. You don't have to keep your video on, but you'll have the ability to kind of pop in, and maybe we'll do visual hand raises or something. We'll make this work.
Sure.
Seth, I'm moving you over. And this is the awkward pause as people get added as panelists. You there, Seth? Oh, there we go.
Here we go. Sorry, I didn't know I was muted. Well, this is great. I'm really excited because years ago, I think I mentioned doing something like this to the late Mayor Brennan. And he told me to circulate a petition to start there, and I just wasn't so motivated. But I've always wanted this to happen, so I was really excited to hear about this. I live across the street from Suzanne on Drexel, closer to CSG, and just wanted to give some of my impressions. I like the idea of a bike lane, but I'd say my impression of the two options is that having a median would add a lot more beauty to the street. I think, and I agree with what you already said, is that it would seem to naturally slow down the traffic just by having that present. Plus you'd have both the bump outs. I would just add one comment, being a resident here and also having grown up on Bexley Park. I'm not so concerned about not being able to turn left if there's a median in front of my driveway. I never could when I grew up. So like having medians and being so concerned that every driveway can access left turns, that doesn't seem like a big concern to me. I think it's a small price to pay for something like this that I think would add so much to the street. And I think the option of having bike lanes without medians, in my opinion, just looking at the image, I still felt like it had this appearance of an interstate. And maybe I'm wrong just seeing it in person with those bump outs, it wouldn't. But I didn't think that made it look more residential if you don't add the medians. So that was my impression. And then I just had a question. Is it not enough space to do a bike lane on one side, still have a median? Because it looked like you only did bump outs on one side where you had the median. So wouldn't the bike lane just take the place of where the parking and bump outs were on the one side?
Do you guys want to answer that, Gina? Or I know we've done this geometry so many times that I think anyone on our team could kind of answer that.
Yeah, and I can share screens again to bring it up.
While you're doing that, Seth, the one thing to know, and we looked at this every way that you could think of to look at it. The medians that are being discussed here are 5 foot width. So they're not what you would think of on Bexley Park or Brighton or Fair. Those are much wider medians. And the reason that is with parking on the side of the street. So that's in this, it's that kind of bright green color in the middle. And in this instance, and I've tried it on my car, the U-turn action that you can do on those wider streets, the Brightons and the Bexley Parks, doesn't work with these medians. So it's not the same condition where like you overshoot your driveway and you do a quick U-turn, it's no big deal. That's what we thought going into it. And our engineers quickly disavowed us of that. Turns out I can do it in my tiny little Chevy Bolt, with no one else parked around, but any sort of larger car can't do that turning motion. Okay. So it doesn't allow for it. Anyway, so sorry, Gina.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were asking, so like looking in this view, the bike, like maintaining the median as well as adding the bike lanes in each direction, if I'm understanding.
Adding maybe
correctly.
one bike lane at the bottom possibly, or top. Because the image you had with the bike lanes, you actually only had bump outs on one side.
Yeah, so you have the median in places, but there's a bike lane on one side as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so if you had one bike lane but still had medians, is that not desirable?
Oh, so
I see,
a
yeah.
bike lane in one direction.
Or I don't know, maybe it's not wide enough to be two directions, but
Yeah, and that was an option that we debated previously, and that's something to do with it's a bit of, I won't defer to ODOT, but it is in their guidance, and just general traffic engineering guidance is that you don't want to provide a bike lane in just one direction, because then it invites people to ride in the wrong way on that bike lane, and then you can have some serious issues there with cyclists in that bike lane. So really the the should statement is what we call it, is that you should have bike lanes in both directions if you have it. So that was kind of what pushes us, that next step is, okay, we have to have bike lanes in both directions. And each bike lane has to be 5 feet wide. And you can see in here, we have 6.3 feet, and that's so that we can have this little bit of buffer between that vehicle and the bicycle. I know as a cyclist, that always makes me feel a little bit safer when I'm riding. So yeah, I think, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could have a bike lane, you could just have it going only one direction.
Yeah, and general traffic engineering guidance is that you don't want to have that option of just a bike lane in one direction. You want to provide it in both directions.
Thanks so much, Seth. Robert Farron is on as a panelist. I should just say is on. What's up?
Thanks everybody for the time. Robert Farron, I live on North Merkel, drive up and down Drexel often, also bike, and participated in the Bexley Bike Plan with several residents and stakeholders through that process over COVID. And as the mayor indicated, this is one, I'm really excited to see the option of bike lanes because it does support a lot of the recommendations in that plan to provide north-south connectivity, direct access to the business district, also direct access from north to south. A couple questions and kind of comments for Carpenter Marty. You mentioned the idea of a cycle track. Is there a way to show that image here? Because you mentioned it, but I know I didn't see that. I'll stop there for a second.
Yeah, we can bring that up if you want.
Yeah, because I know I agree. I think Suzanne, apologize if I didn't say your name correctly. I agree. The number one goal is about slowing traffic down. I'm also very guilty in my little Nissan Leaf of going as fast as I can up and down the street because it allows for it, right? There's not a lot of cars parked on the street. It's pretty wide. And it's really unique in a north-south street. You really can't do that on any other north-south street in Bexley. And so I feel like with a cycle track, you could still achieve slowing traffic down and still provide really, I think, a really amazing cycling experience for families and folks that want to go up and down Drexel from north to south. You would lose parking on one side, and I don't live on Drexel, so I'm not going to speak for residents, but I know driving up and down, it's not very well parked, which again leads to speeds increasing. So I love if you could show that because I think it'd be a cool visual to kind of have other folks on the line see what that looks like.
Yeah, so this is that idea. So it's, kind of like the bike lane option that we brought up, except, instead of being on either side of the road, you have them, both lanes are squished on the one side of the road. So basically just, for all intents and purposes, just taking that parking lane on the east side and replacing it with a cycle track. So, it has the benefits that you mentioned. The negative side of it is, kind of the same with the other bike lane option, is that we can't have those bump outs on the east side now because you have a bike lane there. And, it does, in some areas, it is kind of just still that sea of pavement, if you will,
Yeah, so, sorry.
I'm sorry. Oh, I was just going to add another thing. So when we looked at this option too, just given the existing width of the pavement, we noticed the bike lanes, the actual width of the lanes themselves were getting fairly narrow.
Yeah.
So we're still able to maintain, I think we've got, so it's 4.5. So it's a little wider than 4 feet in both directions. But that was another thing we noticed, just trying to maintain our lane widths, maintain the parking width. The bike lanes were getting a little tight, so still above the 4 feet. In each direction, but the width of the pavement was limiting for how wide we could actually make the cycle track itself.
Yeah.
Two things I want to pull out about this concept. If you could zoom in on the crosswalk section between Brighton and Short Brighton and Long Brighton, I guess. So there are some other possibilities. Back to Seth's kind of question, that marking that shows up as a marking right now, the 3.5 foot marking, if you could hover over top of that, Gina, near the crosswalk, that could, and tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, engineering team, that could be constructed as curb in certain areas, which would, with 6-inch curb on both sides, gives you a 2-foot center, which could be used with, I mean, it could be, Andy's going to kill me for saying this, but it could be ground cover. Yeah, he is. It could be something that does soften the interface, so it achieves some narrowing beyond just the pavement markings. That's a potential option. It's something that we could explore. The other thing is that any of these options, bump outs, all bump outs, or bike lanes on one side or both, do solve another problem that was brought up, and I forgot to address this, which is residents talked a lot about backing out of driveways and the safety experience of backing out of driveways and sight triangles from driveways and from intersections. Both of these ideas give you, as a driver, when you're in these T intersections approaching Drexel, a much clearer line of sight to traffic coming in either direction. And as a driver on a driveway, in many situations, you'll have better line of sight coming out of the driveway, plus the enhancement of having most likely slower traffic. So just wanted to draw that out. Sorry,
That's
Robert.
great. Yeah, no, that's fine. No, thank you. I think, again, I would say if there was parking on both sides and it was all parked up, I think talking about bike lanes probably would be a non-starter. But I think between it not being parked very well, except for around CSG, the goal of slowing down traffic, I think a really great opportunity for our community to provide a really superior cycling experience. And not just for people who are doing like the long rides. I'm thinking about my twin 9-year-olds that I wouldn't necessarily take down Drexel, but if there was a cycle track, if it was vertically protected, either with bollards or some kind of curb, as you mentioned, Mayor, that would be something that we use, and we'd use to connect from north to south. I think it'd be good for businesses, and it would still achieve slowing down traffic. And I think that's really the goal for pedestrians, for vehicles, for cyclists. So I think from a Bexley bike plan perspective, it's great. I think from a beautification standpoint, providing that space for cyclists is great, and it still achieves going from an interstate kind of, as Seth said, to something much more calmer and narrower. So appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, Robert. One real quickly before I bring someone else in here on the panel side, question in the Q&A, basically asking for clarification on, can you still park on the street where those bike lanes are? And I think the answer to that is with the track both ways, there would not be parking on that side of the street.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, you cannot park on the area where the bike lanes are.
Okay. And then
Hi, can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Hi, it says Evan, but my name's actually Dana.
I thought maybe that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to give some comments. I live on South Drexel between Bryden and Sherwood. So my house is one of those houses that's in your photo. And with all due respect to the previous speaker, I very much am in favor of more of the boulevard plan, the first one that was shown, because we cannot afford to give up the parking on our side of the street near us. Those houses, hi honey, we're on a Zoom. The houses all around there, all our neighbors. Evelyn, you have to get out of here. We don't have driveways in the fronts of our homes. We just have these little tiny driveways in the back. And so we actually use our street parking every single day. We have elderly relatives coming over frequently, babysitters. You can imagine the landscape trucks parking there very frequently. And to lose that parking would be a big issue for us. And even to just move the parking to the other side of the street and have it on one really isn't helping either, because then you have people dodging across Drexel to try to get to the house that they need to get to. And the folks that live across the street from us, they also all use the street for parking. And so it would just clog up the one side of the street. And similar to what one of the previous speakers said, okay, sorry. Similar to what one of the previous speakers said, the boulevard option is going to be much more attractive. It's going to really add some beauty to the street. I'm thinking similar to what's on Broad Street. I think that looks really nice. And it's going to do a much better job of slowing the traffic down. And just personally, I'm not a fan of bike lanes. I think they're unattractive. And personally, like I have little kids, you can see they're running around. I wouldn't want them really riding their bikes on Drexel. I think the much better option is to go up Dawson or go up even Columbia or Parkview that are less traveled. I think it's safer. And just for all those reasons, I really feel strongly that the first option is a lot better for the neighborhood.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There was another question on the Q&A about can you still park? Sorry, to actually show the exhibit again, confused as to where the parking wouldn't be allowed. Basically, it could be either side. It would depend on which side the bike lane was on, but the side that the bike lane concept there was on would not have parking because the curb, Gina, you could kind of show the curb on the east side there in this particular exhibit is where the existing curb is today, and instead of parking, it would be a bike lane essentially, and that would be interchangeable if that bike lane concept was either on the east side of the street or the west side.
Yeah, it goes for this bike lane option as well. The parking on the east side would go away.
Yep.
You don't have parking on the west side over here.
All right, Lauren, in a second here, you should be on. Thank you guys for dealing with this tech. I thought we would be done with remote by now, but here we are.
My turn.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. I'll be quick because most of what I have to say sort of mirrors what other people have said. I live on Drexel between Powell and Elm. I'm sort of at the bottom end of the CSG parking. And so I also lean heavily in favor of not doing the bike lane and doing the extra parking. I don't think that it's reasonable to say that you can get all that CSG parking on one side. I think you're going to end up having the same issue, which is that the students are going to park just further down the line, all the way down to Elm, possibly down to Dale. And so you're going to just kind of extend that parking down in that direction. You're not necessarily going to, it's going to be a lot of redirection. If you are not traveling Drexel during the hours that CSG is parking, it's a very heavily parked area. I would go so far as to say if everyone insists on a bike lane, it would really need to stop at Elm. I would not have it go all the way to Broad. The one other thing I'd like to add is I actually grew up in a town that has a bike lane on its sort of main drag, if you will. And there were a lot of accidents growing up. Cars trying to turn right and left where the bike lanes were. Bikes were often going in the wrong direction on the bike lane. They don't stick to the traffic patterns. Bikers have tended in those instances, and obviously maybe our Bexley bikers are different, but growing up, bikers got very brave and would zoom through intersections when they thought they had the right of way, not stopping and looking both ways as they sort of passed a road that was coming into the main road. And that's, again, where a lot of those accidents would happen. Unfortunately, numerous instances of bikers being hit by cars growing up, numerous. And so I don't know that Drexel is the right place for a bike lane, to be honest, especially if we're not going to slow down traffic with the medians. And then you're going to also have people coming in from their driveways and from these sort of cross streets. So I do just want to put that on your radar. I don't know if any study has been done about the safety of bike lanes in these situations, but growing up, my anecdotal experience was it was not safe, and my parents wouldn't let us use it. So that's sort of where I stand on all of that. And I wanted to ask whether or not we've considered stop signs or stoplights throughout Drexel.
So that was something from the beginning. We did collect count data through the corridor, and we have traffic signal warrants. And so it's basically, it's based on the volume of vehicles that are making movements at the intersections. And based on the volume of vehicles that you have now out there, you do not meet signal warrants on Drexel. At least, obviously you have signals at Broad and Main, but between those, we don't meet signal warrants in between there. And in traffic engineering, our general best practice is to not install stop signs as a means of slowing vehicles down, because studies show that what vehicles do is, you stop at that stop sign, but then you speed up right after it. So, it might be slowing you down right at that physical stop sign, but then you're kind of making up for lost time after that. So that's what traffic engineering points us towards. So that's why we don't suggest things like a stop sign or a signal for traffic calming. We like things that are a bit more physical, like medians and bump outs. So that's why we have what we've recommended here.
Great. I'm just very grateful, just before I sign off, just very grateful that you guys are looking at this. It's been a long time coming and long overdue, and very excited about the prospects. So thank you guys so much for all your work.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you.
Quick answer to a question on the Q&A, which was the bump outs. What would they be made out of? On the exhibit, they show up as gray. That's simply to call out the difference. We're not envisioning concrete or asphalt bump outs. We're envisioning grass. Maybe down the road, the tree lawn could, as trees get replaced, there might be an ability to have the trees placed a little more central between those bump out curbs and the sidewalk. But that would be a down the road thing, because the trees that are on Drexel in general are a little younger and hopefully in okay shape for the most part. But it would be, long story short, it would be landscaped green bump out interface. If anyone wanted to kind of see, this is not analogous, by the way, but kind of see like what this looks like. And if you go to the short north and you see what happened to those outside travel lanes, now not analogous, because that was 4-lane road essentially becoming a 2-lane, or 5-lane becoming a 3-lane. But at least you can kind of get the feel of what that sheltered parking feels like. And again, not analogous, because this would be green. This is a residential street. And in fact, that bump out is designed to enhance the residentiality of the street. And Lisa, I am moving you over. Sorry about that. I should have done that ahead of time. There's a little pause. Anything to add to any of that? All right.
I think so.
Lisa, you should be able to speak.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay,
How you doing?
sorry. You answered my question. One of my questions had to do with the bump outs in terms of what it looked like. I wanted to see an image of it. I was worried it was concrete, which is not very appealing. We're a newly resident of the street. We moved here in July. So we are learning the traffic issues around here that we were not necessarily aware of, even though we lived in Bexley, or have lived in Bexley for 60 some years. But I was wondering too, have you thought about, and I know that they're not necessarily a way to reduce speed, but like on Cassidy, where they showed you're driving down there and you can see what your speed is. A few here and there to say, okay, I'm aware I'm going over the speed limit. I'll slow down a little bit if it's like in your face and you see it. The other thing I wondered about is, are there examples outside of the short north that have been successful in other neighborhoods where we could see, the results of this kind of a change that made a difference, rather than just, assuming it will? Is there something we can actually refer to that this is the way it was before, this is how it is now, and it's really made a huge difference with the changes that were made?
I think we can definitely look at options in other areas. I know that we've definitely recommended it in a lot of
Right.
places. It's following through with some of those cities and villages to see if they have. I know off the top of my head that Springfield has some, but I can get with Ben and send him maybe some links to some examples that can be shared out.
That'd be
Yeah.
great.
I think Upper Arlington has done, I'm not sure if it's double-sided bump outs, but they've done bump outs to try to create some of these effects, not that I'm aware of as ambitiously as what we're talking about it. And actually, what I'd like to do is if I'm going to create a quick, trying to think how to do this. If you could actually, okay, I'll do this. We're going to put Andy Bayshore's email address in the chat. And if you could send him your email address, we just have it. It would be great to have an email list for those who are on this call. You can do that, or you can add your email address to the chat. I think right now it might be somewhat restricted, but Andy, we'll put your email address in there as well, just so that anyone who wants to add theirs, that way it would just be helpful to be able to keep track of, with what's going on, give you guys an update. Also, if you're registered for the blast and you've put your address as Drexel, you will be able to send out special blasts. Julie, I'm moving you over.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Julie Eikenberry. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Columbus School for Girls. And I think most of you who don't know us probably know that at the school, we try to make sure that we are very good residents. So we comment that I think Robert made is, could us and the city work together? Absolutely, if that is where we need to go. What I am concerned about is, of course, is losing the parking. And I'm just guessing because I don't go out there and count the cars, but I bet you on a given day, looking at what's both sides of the street on Drexel, the parking, we could have up to maybe 25 cars, and maybe I'm too low on that one. So what we're going to do, sorry, John, hold on one second. What we'll end up doing is we will end up moving those cars to the side streets, which I think is going to move it really to Dawson, because the parking on Parkview already is 2-hour parking. And so is Columbia. So that's my concern, is that we're just going to move students, faculty, and staff into Dawson. And so I'm concerned about that. The other thing that I wondered, and this is a question, is for that bike lane, if you do 2 bike lanes and you do the one where it's parking and then the bike lane, like how safe is it for the bikers to be driving down and and having car doors opening? I'm sure people are paying attention, but to me that seemed kind of scary.
That's a legitimate concern. Yeah.
Okay.
And in traffic engineering, in the bicycle community, that is, what do we call that? Door swinging crashes.
Door zone. Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, door zone, yeah. That is a concern. And I think, if we, like I was saying, how, some of these options, it's a compromise between parking and biking and, your travel lanes. I would say that the bike lane option in and of itself is a bit of a compromise as well, because we're working within that existing typical section, our existing roadway width that we have right now. In an ideal world, you would have a nice bike lane with buffer on each side, so that way you don't have concerns about the door opening up on that parking lane. But we're restricted by the existing roadway width, because we don't want to go wider than what we have now. So that is the compromise, and that concern that you bring up is legitimate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Anything else?
No, unless anybody has any questions for me that I can answer.
I was about to come up with a bad joke, so I won't do that, but it's always good to see you. Thank you.
Send that to Jennifer.
I'll send it to John. Aaron Caldwell, you're being moved over. And while you're being moved over, Kenny Brown joined a little bit late. He was wondering, he hadn't seen the designs. He was wondering if he could quickly flash them up on the screen. So maybe as Aaron is speaking, you guys could just show like the median or the bump out, double bump out option and a bike lane option. Kenny, I will disappoint you in advance and let you know that we don't have those shown in the business district. This is just kind of a cross section near Short and Long Bryden. The reason for that is there's a lot pending, what would happen in the business district? Do we kind of reroute bikes down the Sherwood and Bryden Bike Boulevard at that point? So this is just an illustration north of business district. So sorry for talking too much, but it happens. Aaron? You should be able to.
My first question is if you could just zoom out a little bit. I haven't seen this image like at full. Thank you. I'm just trying to get a feel for where the other cross streets are. I apologize because I was a little tardy to the meeting. Has anyone asked if this will affect like the marathon or given that it goes down Drexel or any of our like snow removal, leaf removal, things of that nature, especially if there's a bump out?
So we have not specifically asked the marathon. Andy Bayshore is our service director, and he's here on the call. We've had lots of conversations about snow removal and leaf removal. Andy, I don't think we've talked specifically about leaf removal, but we have talked about snow removal and plowing. That's often a concern. In terms of the bump outs themselves, the width of the street is not unlike other streets that the marathon's coming through with that throttled bump out. However, the median would present a different condition, and there would be medians from time to time. And that's a really great point you raised. We can reach out to the organizers of the marathon and just see if they have any feedback on that, if they have analogous situations or have any thoughts.
And then in these two images, do they go past Brighton? Like, is there something farther north that I'm just not seeing, or this is the only place that you're making a change?
Great question. So Carpenter Marty has designed this particular scenario in rough concept all the way along the street because we've tried to really understand the feasibility of it with where driveways are and making sure that if bump outs occurred, that there would be every lot would still have some access to on-street parking. So there is a bigger, wider view of this. I don't know if you have a specific area you want to take a look at. Gina, are you able to open that scroll plot?
Yes.
Okay. So
my house is in that image you've shown, but I
Okay.
cannot tell like what's happening in front of it. And we're relatively new to this area. We just moved here in March. I would say, to echo Lauren Rubin's point around the driveways, I guess my concern is backing out of the driveway on Drexel is already kind of hard enough without having to watch for bikers. So that would be my biggest question on what does that look like farther north on Drexel.
So I don't know that we have a scroll plot of the cycle lane concept. I think that was done as a scenario. We have a scroll plot of the double bump outs along the whole street. Is that right, guys?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and it is.
Yeah,
So it is
it's a massive
Large
file.
file.
Yeah, and this
Crashes
is
my computer half the time.
yeah. In an ideal world, when we were just talking about the idea of this public meeting, we plan to have a nice big scroll plot, a physical drawing of this out for everybody to see and point to, but it does not show up as well on Zoom, as you can see. And so
You can't zoom in.
Yeah, we could zoom in. So like we could zoom into maybe the Powell or the Fair intersections and actually, as we look at this, I want to highlight one other thing that we responded to from our May workshop, Julie, that applies to CSG, which is that left turn motion out of the circle shows up as a solution in here a little bit. So Aaron, what would you like to see?
Yeah, if you could, we live between Brighton and Bexley Park, so that would be helpful.
And welcome, by the way, welcome to Bexley.
Appreciate it. And the crosswalks, will those have the flashing lights similar to the one that's farther down?
So the way that this is currently conceived, the flashing light beacons are designed to be crosswalks, which are direct routes to the school. We use them sparingly, not because we're trying to be cheap about it, but because we really want drivers to see them and pay attention to them. So they flank the north and south approaches to the Cassingham complex today. This plan does call for preserving those, obviously, and those are newer on Drexel, but also adding one at Powell for the crossing for CSG, because that's a crossing that, especially when buses are there, even though there's options that officers are there, can be problematic.
Thank you. This was helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And then I think we're gonna get up to that circle that we were talking about. And Julie, I don't know if you recall that, but that was at the workshop, a discussion about you have a prohibition against left-hand turns out of that drive. This would put a physical barrier to make it so that that left-hand turn would be not possible or kamikaze, I guess.
Yeah, so we would be adding a little bit more of a curb coming out here to kind of pinch it down and direct vehicles more, saying, you know, I know that there's a sign out there that says no left turns, but now we're physically directing you to make that right turn, in addition to that median that we're adding here. You know, obviously, like Ben said, you can still make some crazy moves here and do whatever you want, but I think that this will go a long way in, you know, getting rid of those left turners that you have out of there, and that issue that you all mentioned in the last public meeting we had.
Yeah, we would fully support that. I've been out there in the mornings, and it's dangerous when some of the people want to turn left with all the cars that are coming. So we fully support forcing it to be a right turn.
Thank you. And anyone else? First up, okay, I've got another attendee, a couple more attendees with hands up. Appreciate that. I'm gonna move you over. And then if others who have already spoken have any kind of follow-up thoughts or questions, we'll move back to you. So Mark Subel. Kenny, I'm going to move you over, but if you could just wait until Mark's done, that would be awesome.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm actually not a resident of Drexel, but I was on the bike study that went around Bexley throughout the entire neighborhood. I mean, north, south, east, west, with the purpose of, you know, trying to promote a better cycling infrastructure for Bexley. So I have a little bit different perspective. I also commute by bike downtown from Bexley. I also take my kids on my bike from south to north, from north to south. So I am innately aware of everything throughout Bexley in terms of bikes and everything like that. So a couple of things here. I think that the cycle track option, the one where the bike lanes are on the one side of the street, will still provide, you know, an aesthetically pleasing look. It might not be as good as the median, but it won't be like this concrete field. I mean, there will be some greenery that separates the lanes. In terms of the parking, I understand from the one person that talked earlier, that is really tough at the south end there. I understand that. So like part of it is that, you know, anytime you do something like this for kind of like a greater good of, you know, getting people safely from one part to another, having another option instead of driving. I mean, most of my routes in Bexley are like under a mile. And I hate driving to try to find parking and do that. So we found it actually a very pleasing way to get around the neighborhood. So losing parking, I understand is a concern. There still would be parking on the one side from what I saw in there, and also on some of the side streets as well. It also provides just, you know, the one comment about, you know, cyclists. I can attest to rogue cyclists. I actually ride with them, you know, to work and back and throughout Bexley. This typically will have the impact, the cycling, the track, the lanes, because I've ridden lanes, I've ridden them here, other cities, even in Europe. It actually makes cyclists almost behave better. They will stay in the lanes. They won't be darting in and out. Of course, there's going to be unscrupulous people that will do that, just like unscrupulous drivers. There's no doubt about that. But generally, we see safer bike riding. The other thing about the median, in terms of, you will see more bike riders as a result of that, even if you don't put the cycling lanes in there. They will take that route because it's going to slow traffic down naturally. So what I think you'll see is more people take that route, which will actually slow traffic almost too much to where you're going to start to see like these bikers. And then what's going to happen is they're going to start going right to where there's no parking, nobody parking, and dart back into traffic. So you're going to actually make it less safe for them. And it's going to create a little bit of havoc. I've experienced that multiple times, especially in Neal Avenue, where I used to live there, where you would just ride, people would be on you, you'd be going 10 miles an hour, and then you would dart to the right where there was no parking for maybe a block, and then dart back in, it caused a lot of havoc. So just a little bit different of a perspective. Again, I don't live on Drexel, don't live and breathe it, but just from what I saw kind of getting around Bexley, those are some of the things I just wanted to, bring to the forefront.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks so much. Kenny Brown. Should be able to. Did I move you over? Hold on, Kenny. You there? Oh, I'm sorry, Kenny. Hold on 1 second. Thought I did that already. You'd think that we would have figured out how to use this platform by now. There he is.
Hello. Two quick comments. One to Mark's comment. My wife and I ride bikes in the summer quite a bit. We never go on Drexel just because there's so much traffic. We always go on Columbia or a street to the east, so we avoid that. And it's not that difficult. It just worries me, whatever changes you make to Drexel, just having bikes there, it's so much quieter and easier to ride on a Columbia or another street. The other comment is what do you call the flashing pedestrian crosswalk?
We'll call them beacons. We'll call them beacons.
Beacons. Do people, this is to Carpenter Marty, I guess, do people start to learn that they're there over time? Because every time I stop when they're flashing, probably a third of the time there's somebody zooming through them while people are starting to walk across. I'm just worried.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you that there is a learning curve associated with those beacons. And I would say that learning curve is for drivers as well as pedestrians. Sometimes pedestrians don't know that they have to push the button, or sometimes they just choose not to push it. So some of it is a little bit of education to the pedestrians, make sure that you push the button, you'll have a safer crossing if you do. And then, like you said, also the drivers, obviously some education there. I think that since you already have an RFB up there on the road, we call it RFBs. That's rectangular rapid flashing beacon. But yeah, so, when you have it already, hopefully when, you start putting more up, people are going to get the idea. And I also think, they're becoming a lot more prominent around Columbus in general. I know Hilliard is putting them up everywhere. There's some around Easton. I would say any given Columbus suburb, there's an RFB out there. So yeah, I think there's a learning curve. I think that people are learning more of how to use it, and it'll get better over time.
Okay, great.
I do want to say one thing, and that is just like, it's not a cure-all. I mean, we've been, I've been discouraged because we put that law in place a few years ago that, requires people to stop for pedestrians at the crosswalk, that, has the sign with the sign of the fee, it's $250. And Andy has to go out there every week and replace them because they get hit by cars. But, and honestly, it's been a little disconcerting to see some of the pedestrian behavior this year, especially at Capitol. We've dealt with seeing kids hit because they're just assuming that a car is going to stop for them, because as people have gotten better at it in general, that's great. But then from time to time, you'll have the car that doesn't. And so it's a line you toe between, creating this infrastructure that's in theory much safer, but at the end of the day, like, we can't give pedestrians a false sense of security that you don't have to still look at the traffic that's oncoming. I think that both of these concepts where you have those bump outs, the advantage of the bump out, and if you have a bike lane, the same kind of thing happens, is that the pedestrian would be much more visible to traffic because it gets you out from those vehicles. There's a much clearer view shed, and then the crosswalk distance is a lot shorter. So with or without the beacons, I think we're excited about the potential that this has for the crossing environment on Drexel. I don't see any other hands raised. If there's someone else in the attendee side who wants to make a comment or has any questions, now's a good time. If there's anyone who's already been moved over who has any follow-ups, we're here. So you could go ahead and there you go.
I have another comment, sorry. I didn't see a lot of my neighbors on this call tonight, and I just want to make sure that everyone has the chance to give their feedback for this. So what should be the next steps for folks who maybe didn't get to participate tonight but would like to be heard?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. So our next step with this is we're going to, as a team, kind of try to synthesize some of the feedback and comments we've had and narrow the concept a little bit. And then we'll circulate that back to Drexel neighbors, and also we'll have a city council discussion to talk about it as well. You're right, there's only 25 people on this call right now. Much better feedback than we had in May, so that's good. But we need to continue to get this out there, distribute it out there. Thank you. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
Just chatted, but what's the timeline? Can you remind us on all of this?
Well, we are hoping to go get drawings for construction in the coming months. So we're trying to get a decision made probably in the next month or two. Now, I know that Dave Koch is our city engineer, and that's longer timeline than he wants, but I think it's really important for us to get this right and to get feedback before we go to finalize any drawings. So having said all that, we have funding lined up for this project. We're hoping to start construction this summer on it. And the construction window closes in November. So we are hoping to make a decision in the next month or two.
Ben, can I say one thing on schedule? We are due to start the underground infrastructure portion of the project, water line replacement and some drainage improvements, and that's going to start tentatively the first week of March. So that will be occurring first.
Right, to that point, thanks, Dave. Since we have you all here on the call, we focused a lot about the street piece of this, but you've seen the sewer trucks and experienced their impact on the sewer lining project that happened this summer. That's part of the same project this past summer, sorry. Dave, do you want to just give a real brief overview of what's going to happen this summer before any street improvements?
Yes, thanks, Ben. Starting the first available opportunity when weather allows, we're going to work on a water main installations, and tentatively we're going to start at Main Street and work north. We're working in small phased areas of 1 to 2 blocks at a time, and they're going to be working extensively within that zone on the side of the street where the water main will be located. The other side will be open to two-way traffic. In the work zone, there will not be necessarily street parking allowed during that phase. So when we have the new water main installed and or the new storm sewer for that block, we'll repair the pavement, we'll clean it up, and then we'll move northward to the next area. Julie, your area will be tentatively scheduled for when school's out, and that will be later in the spring, early summer, hopefully. So my idea afterwards, after we have cleared some of these areas, is that we could start with the surface improvements, the traffic safety improvements, as a separate contract and separate crew, again, starting in the south and working north. So there would be potential another time when certain areas, not whole blocks, but certain areas would have improvements taking place. And that would work in the same fashion, most likely from south to north. The ODOT is working with us also on a repaving project, which we're finalizing the documents on, and they're set to go to bid now in May. And that tentative date for repaving the road will be contingent on our finishing the projects I just discussed, and would be no earlier than September, October timeframe. If we can finish by then. If not, cold weather and temperatures will push us off into the spring to 2023. So, but in no case will there not be pavement down to use over the winter. Every trench will be patched in every phase before we move to the next phase. So we'll be putting more notices out over time too, and for residents, not necessarily for travelers, but for residents on the street, they'll see a lot of notices for different activities and different ideas that we're need to communicate to them. And that'll probably start in about a month and a half from now.
Dave, just to give people a preview of coming attractions, the storm sewer work that's happening, is that going to get rid of the fair and Drexel Pond?
That's the primary focus, is to create a storm sewer that can drain that area effectively in most storms. Not all storms, but most storms. Right now, it backs up quite frequently, as people are aware.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make it clear that there's a storm sewer piece to this, which, we're pretty excited will solve some infrastructure shortcomings in that stretch of Drexel and help with lots of other issues. I want to be clear on the next steps and timeline, because I see some questions in the chat about that. We will send another letter out to residents with, as those drawings are refined, with any drawings that are going to be brought to city council, and so that the concepts are clear. And because I understand that a piece of paper that just talks about a meeting doesn't really send the message the same as saying, here are some things that are going to be discussed. So we'll send it with illustrations and then a specific time for a discussion at a city council meeting. I would imagine in February. So that's a timeline we still I need to come back after this feedback with our team and make sure that those timelines are realistic. But as I said before, we're not going to close the door for comment after this meeting. I want to still continue to hear back from you guys, and we'll share with you the progress that happens. And yes, I will reach out to the Columbus Marathon. We'll do that this week just to make sure that we get their feedback in pocket as we consider this. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
I just wanted to chime in and thank everyone, thank the consultants and the city staff for the opportunity for us to talk about this. And also just for considering bike lanes and prioritizing cycling, and the fact that the city is making investments like this. So I don't think anyone should take that for granted. And most importantly, showing my 9-year-old daughter how things get done in a city. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks, Robert. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. We will reach back out to you with our next steps, and really appreciate your feedback this evening. It's been super helpful. So thank you very much and have a great evening. I'll see you. All right. Bye.